I'm Julie Kohler, host of the White Picket Fence podcast. If you've read the opinion section of any newspaper lately, you've probably come across think pieces, panicking about falling marriage rates. They make sweeping claims that getting married will make you happier, healthier, and wealthier. Some even say that getting married is a way to stick it to the elites. I'm not so sure about that. This season on White Picket Fence, we're examining the current marriage panic. We'll go beyond the rosy sheen of love and commitment and expose the darker side to all of this marriage talk and explore what becomes possible when we broaden our imagination around what relationships can look like. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back, Brown Girls. I'm A'shanti Gholar, the founder of the Brown Girls Guide to Politics. Welcome to another episode of Season 5 of the podcast. This episode is all about women of color on the ballot and the power of our voice and our vote. This year is the centennial of the women's suffrage movement, which saw the 19th Amendment ratified to the Constitution, giving women the right to vote.
It took George Washington 6 years to rectify men's grievances by war, but it took 72 years to establish women's rights by law.
But we know it only granted some women the right to vote. Black, brown, and indigenous women's right to vote came in 1965 and after.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time.
This has had a direct result on women of color's representation in government. 2020 is another year where Black, brown, and indigenous women are running and leading organizations all over the country to better our communities. Glynda Carr is the CEO and co-founder of Higher Heights for America, the national movement to grow Black women's political power from the voting booth to elected office. Linh Nguyen is political director of RUN AAPI. RUN AAPI is an organization that strives to give Asian American Pacific Islanders better representation and discusses the importance of AAPI voting. And today we're diving into women of color that are on the ballot and also what candidates and campaigns need to be doing better to reach out to Black, brown, and indigenous communities. We have Glynda Carr, the co-founder and president of Higher Heights. So if you listen to our episode before this with State's Attorney Aisha Brayboy, she was wearing her Black Women Lead shirt. So that shirt comes from Higher Heights. And we have Linh Nguyen, the political director for RUN AAPI, a new initiative that just out of the gates gained so much attention and is doing wonderful work. And I can't wait to dive into talking to her about the amazing things that they're doing. But in typical BGG fashion, we have to start off the conversation by talking about how our brown girls got involved in politics. So Linh, let's start with you. What made you want to do this work? I met you when you were on Senator Booker's presidential race. Linh worked with one of my best friends, Tamia Booker, who is the political director. We just immediately had that energy.
I appreciate y'all for letting me even on here. I think I just want to start, it's always such a struggle for us like Asian women thinking, okay, if this is a space for Black and brown women, do we belong? You know, us as organizers in this space, like we challenge ourselves on that every single day. I appreciate that y'all see us as part of this fight. I do. No, my start in politics, it was in high school. I had to fulfill my community service hours. So I volunteered for my local mayor's race. obviously had no idea what organizing was, what it meant to talk to voters. And it wasn't until college when I was organizing around the divestment movement, and I was like, oh shit, okay, so this is what this is. But I think what's really interesting is that I think for me, because I get asked that a lot, especially with like the next generation of organizers coming in, and it wasn't so much like what started this interest, but it's been, especially in the last few years, it's been the women around me that have kept me in it, and it's like, I think we often feel so burnt out in this process. But it has absolutely been like this network, this like very intentional network of women that have kept me here. So,
and we will go to Glynda, and it's weird for me, y'all, not to see Glynda 2 or 3 times a month. That's how often we would just see each other at different events, conferences. And even when we get on the phone, I'm like, it's my Glynda. I'm like, I miss you so much. But I'm super excited to have her here today. Higher Heights, it's an organization that I've been involved with for a long time now. It's an organization that I give a lot of my time, my coins as well, because that's important. So Glynda, tell us what brought you to this work.
I come from a politically active family. I mean, I don't think they overtly would call themselves that, but others did, right? And so I am, a daughter of a Caribbean immigrant, migrated here. My mother picked him up next door, literally, like, who's this guy next door? And, dated, got married, and had 3 children, and I'm the baby. And my father was a community activist, right? And here's a man that didn't become a citizen until the later part of his life because he wanted to vote for his friend Joe Lieberman, and but everybody assumed he was the political, Caribbean political maker in the community about making sure people registered to vote. He was very active, and so was my mother. On my 18th birthday, I'm sure my parents gave me jewelry because that's what they gave me at every birthday. Don't remember what it was. Don't know where it is, but they registered me to vote. My mother put me in her car, drove me down to City Hall, and registered me to vote. And until the day she died, she called me and my brothers on major elections to make sure we voted. So it was just kind of ingrained around our civic engagement. But I thought I was going to be a musician. Went to music conservatory and was politically engaged on campus, as we all are, particularly if you go to a predominantly white college. There's always some takeover. I was in college during the Rodney King verdict, and my parents instilled in me, brought me to my student leadership and my political leadership on campus. And working full time was just by happenstance, right? I volunteered for a campaign when I moved to New York for now a state senator, Kevin Parker, who has since become one of my best friends, and somehow became a volunteer because my brother thought that would be a great way for me to meet people. So I was raising money for him, and then became a super volunteer. And then he invited me to, consider being his chief of staff. So spent 6 years in the state legislature as a chief of staff of a New York state senator, and then did some advocacy work. And so I was just sharing with a reporter earlier, they were like, oh, tell us why you started Higher Heights and what was the landscape. I was like, Kim and I we were having coffee and venting like we do as girlfriends. Like, I'm tired of seeing rooms full of white people, and caucusing with the 3 other people of color, not even the 3 other Black women, the 3 other people of color. And we were like, we should start our own thing. And literally we wrote the name Higher Heights down. So it wasn't a whole grand scheme of things. It was over coffee, like we often do, talking about how we can make democracy better.
And I never heard that part about you wanting to be a musician. So I found out something new about you, but I totally resonated with your mother giving you the voter registration form. I have 2 younger brothers, and they always tell everyone that was my gift to them when they turned 18. I gave them a voter registration form. And the older of the 2, when he's really in the mood to mess with me, he tells everyone, yeah, my first word was Democrat. That's how involved my sister was with politics, that she loved them. I was like, leave me alone. I do want to continue our conversation. We know this year we commemorated the 100 years of the 19th Amendment, which only gave some women the right to vote. It did not apply to Black, Brown, and Indigenous women. It was really 1965 and after that we were able to fully have political participation when it came to voting. And we know that has a direct correlation to the numbers of women of color that we see in office today, despite the fact that we're in another cycle with a record number of women of color running. So keeping with you, Glynda, tell us about Higher Heights work to really elevate the voices of Black women in particular when it comes to political leadership and elected leadership, and why that is so important in this election cycle.
So, I mean, when Kimberly and I kind of wrote the words Higher Heights down for the first time, it was the notion, how do we actually use our political power to expand our elected leadership and use that power, obviously, to change at the end of the day, the circumstances of our family, friends, and neighbors, right? Black women, like all women, we want economically thriving, educated, healthy, and safe communities. And because we work in politics and policy, that all roads, to be able to do that, all roads ends back on policymaking, which is tied to politics and our elected leadership. And so we knew we developed a blueprint, but at the end of the day, Kamala Harris said this to us in 2018. Did you know you were going to build an organization for us a time as this? That we were building the political home that would help to recruit, train, and support Black women to run for office, but frankly, give Black women a space to be informed and engaged and to take action. And that is from the entry point of registering to vote, to voting, to advocating on the issues as citizens, to thinking about running for office and governing. And so our work, it believes that when you have diverse decision-making tables, they make better decisions, and that Black women are uniquely positioned to strengthen that decision-making table, both because of our qualifications that we bring to those tables, but our lived experiences. And so I usually answer this question, A'shanti, with an example. So in 2018, we helped to elect the largest number of Black women to serve in Congress on the 50th anniversary of Shirley Chisholm being elected to that body as the first Black woman. And so although we celebrated that we elected these amazing Black women, we also elected a nurse, a teacher, a city council member, a state legislator who is a Somalian refugee, and a mother of a young Black boy that was killed by gun violence that was racially motivated. You then enter 2020, these 5 Black women in particular, though, during a global pandemic, we have a health professional sitting at that table, while parents are grappling with how do we educate our children remotely and ensure that every child has access to broadband and technology during this time. You have not only a teacher, the 2016 Teacher of the Year, sitting at that table. And as you know, in this second phase, 2.5 phase of COVID-19, we're going to see the strain of our city governments and our state governments as it relates to budget shortfalls and having to make budget priorities and some budget cuts, that you now have a local legislator and a state legislator sitting at that decision-making tables. And then at the end of the day, we're grappling with systemic racism and police brutality and gun violence. And you have a woman who is the closest to that pain sitting at the table and having her peers have to answer to her around how do we create sensible gun violence and structural changes around our criminal justice system.
So glad to have those women at the table. And Glynda, with you talking about the racial injustice, just the hatred, we know that our API community, they've also experienced a lot of that this year with COVID, and particularly how Trump has fueled that with calling it the China virus. And pivoting to Lynn, it was just so important during that time that we had so many AAPI elected officials that were able to speak out. So it also ties to why we need to have particularly the voices of women in these communities at the table during times like this. I mean, Judy Chu was just out there 100% saying, let me tell you what you're not about to do. So I want to get your take on everything.
Yeah, this has just been such a trying election year in just so many nuanced in so many complex ways and for so many different communities. And I think what's been most interesting, I've had so many of these conversations in different Asian American circles, and that I think for the first time, our community actually coalesced around one single issue, right? And it was over the summer when COVID-19 was such a visceral thing for so many of us, that the anti-Asian violence, the hate, the xenophobia, the racism became like one talking point that we could go home to our kitchen table and have that conversation with our parents or with our relatives. And it wouldn't be such like a politically charged conversation. Be like, it would really have us center the idea of, okay, what are we not doing to protect ourselves and protect our people? And I've never had that conversation when it comes to the electoral side of things, when we're trying to mobilize Asian American voters behind a candidate, behind a single issue. But this became such a critical summer, for what it means to be Asian American. And I think it's I love that you mentioned Representative Judy Chu, because also at the same time we have a Representative Grace Meng, over in New York. She's just had my back in the work that we've been doing with mobilizing Asian American voters, specifically for women. And she mentioned this the other day, and it was to NBC News, in that we're in a really difficult space as Asian American women, where we can't go to the Democratic Party and say, okay, y'all, like in order for us to win, and I'm here in Texas where there's such a palpable population here, ready to exercise their rights. But we're just not at that point where we can go to the party and say, okay, y'all cannot win without us, And so we're in this space where, and especially for our giants like Judy Chu and Grace Meng, like they're really holding it down for us, but we're still fighting for visibility, and whether it's in politics, it's in entertainment, it's in creative, it's in the arts industry, but we're still fighting for like the very basic representation in this space. And that's kind of why like RUN AAPI, like we launched the new campaign just a couple of weeks ago, and yet there was so many different groups within like the AAPI umbrella that were coming to us and saying, holy shit, like I've never like seen a video like this before, or like our storytelling hasn't been done like this before, right? And whether they were first generation, second generation, whether they've been 30 plus year immigrants here in this country, but it was, I feel like there are times when we're fighting for crumbs for the Asian American community.
We keep it real on this podcast, and even with Black women, Glynda and I, we've had this conversation. We've had this conversation with so many of the other women who work in this space, that even with Black women, with our turnout levels, they still feel that we can be ignored. They still feel that they can give us crumbs. So let's talk about that and why we need to stop having our party take our votes for granted. I know just even during the summer with the election heating up, something I saw all the time was people tweeting like, Black women are going to save us. And I'm like, you're on your couch tweeting that. What are you going to do to help save yourself? Why are you putting this on Black women? And then there's the other part of me that's like, you're tweeting this, but you're also probably going to get on your Zoom call for work the next day and be disrespectful to the women of color that you work with. So it seems that even despite all of these gains, we're still fighting for recognition.
So Black women are like, it's one of my favorite quotes, like Fannie Lou Hamer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? We just, our C3 organization, Higher Heights Leadership Fund, just put out some research. We talked to 506, we did an online survey of 506 likely Black women voters. And what came out of that was that there's a sense of anxiety around this election cycle and the outcome. Gen Xers, which is what I am, is actually the ones that are most concerned about the uncertainty and the anxiety. And so I certainly feel that. And so I feel that everyday women, and then the women that work in this space, like A'shanti, myself, and others, that it feels that there is this undue pressure that people have put on us. It is not that we're a reliable Democratic voter and that we're a reliable voter for a particular candidate. We're issue candidate. We're issue voters, right? And we believe that we are putting forth candidates who oftentimes don't talk to us, right? Don't get a piece of mail. The fact that they know we're going to do what we do, and we are, and on top of it, we're the best return on a voting investment because we don't go to the polls alone. What's different this year that I see with my friends, what I see with the women that we work with, is that we're demanding our return on our voting investment. Like, we can't be the people that are saving democracy and then be at the bottom of every economic and health and social indicator in this country. That we shouldn't be dying at 25 of a heart attack. We shouldn't, overwhelmingly be dealing with mental mental illness and suicide, like all these things that are tied to a variety of policy issues, but yet and still we are building the table. And so I'm so excited about all the Black women that are running who are like snatching that table back in a way that is not only going to transform Black women and our families, but the whole nation.
Rep. Liz Miranda, she posted a graphic on her Twitter, and it said, Black women can't be your shield and your target. I felt that still stays with me. And Lynn, you talked a little bit about RUN AAPI, but tell us more about why it was founded, how you got involved, and the work that it's doing. And y'all definitely have to go check out the videos that they have, because these are some good videos.
And I like A'shanti, like, this, like my background has always just been going campaign to campaign, candidate to candidate. Like Houston has been my home the last 3 years now, which is like, this is the longest time I've ever been in one state, one city, because I've just had this like incredible privilege of being able to travel and be very selective with who I get to work for. But I like, y'all know this, it's just, we are just so limited on the campaign side. And so after Super Tuesday, I think it was signaled very clear to us early on that, okay, like the Asian American vote was just going to be likely an afterthought, right, for Democrats. And we're so lucky to have that visibility with Kamala Harris, being on the ticket. But at the same time, like I'm sure like y'all remember, like when Joe Biden had finally announced Kamala as his running mate, I think it was like every other headline just completely erased her biracial identity as a Black and Asian woman, right? And so like there were a number of community leaders and elected officials that kind of had to step forward and say, hey, y'all, like this is like wildly inaccurate reporting. And again, it just erases us from this place and really erasing our political power. And that's why like with RUN AAPI, we knew that one, and we did this poll just a couple of weeks ago on younger Asian American voters. The biggest factor with Asian American women voters is that they just weren't motivated in this year, period. There was there was no motivational factor. And this is like 18 to 34-year-olds. We had polling done in a number of battleground states where like the API community could be like the ultimate deciders should they choose to do this. So that like for us, like our dynamics, I feel is like so I don't want to say it's so far behind, but we're almost like in a fight for different, like our bar is just set so low, I think is what I'm trying to say, and like what was so interesting, looks like the last example I'll say, because I just have to stop shitting on Democrats. We're really big on accountability in this space. But it was most recent, I think this again was like a week ago. And, the Joe Biden campaign on their Instagram feed, like directly on their grid, they posted an image of a Vietnamese American woman. She's actually here in Houston. I know the family of her holding a sign that says vote for Biden. It was like such a the visuals were so powerful. But for us to have that one square little space on his IG grid, we've never been showcased like that before. And let alone having like a placard that was in language in Vietnamese. That one image, that went viral within our community. And that woman, she's a first-time Democratic voter here in Houston. I know her daughter really well because she's also just getting involved for the first time this year. And yet sometimes it takes so little visibility, so little effort, to really excite us and to feel like, holy shit, okay, so like we do have a place here. Or we are like they do recognize that they also want us part of this. So this year has been a struggle. And I will say like the real solidarity that we've seen, especially with my generation and like progressive Asian Americans, is the solidarity of our Black and brown sisters, it's been so, it's like an unwritten feeling, that kind of sisterhood is just there. And it's like, and y'all know this, but it's just indescribable.
We know we have so many great women who are on the ballot November 3rd. Whoever wants to start, tell us, what are some of the races that our listeners should be watching? Who do we think are going to be the breakout stars that we're going to be talking about on November 4th?
I would let's start with how I described the freshman five, right? And it's the types of women that are running that is inspiring for me. So we have a Army veteran who retired as a lieutenant, right? Who's an educator and a local elected official in the state that I currently call home, New York, right? Jackie Gordon. We have moms running, right? And moms of young children. Research, historically pointed to that women usually run when their children are older. And so what we've seen over the last couple of cycles are women running with young families, right? And being able to juggle that. And so Candace Venezuela will not only be the first Afro-Latina to be elected from Texas. That is like transformative about what type of voices you will continue to have in Washington. We thought, like Lauren Underwood was the youngest Black woman to run. And now she's got like Ray Timms, who is exactly the type of young professional you want to come back to the hometown. Here's, a young lady who worked on the Hill, decided to go back home, right, to run for office. And she's 32? I feel like an auntie. She's young. Joyce Elliott in Arkansas, right? And so not only are you going to see Black women increasing their elected leadership, you're going to see continuing to see the diversity of the types of districts that we're coming from and what types of states. So Arkansas, right? She'd obviously be the first African-American woman from Arkansas, but was a state legislator. And then I'll just leave with my one last one about stepping into the moment is a Patricia Timmons Goodson, who is a former judge, and not just a judge of one bench, but on multiple benches. I can go on because there's a record number. Who else do you want to talk about? Those in particular around their backgrounds, I think are very interesting and inspiring because research from the Center for American Women in Politics points to role modeling effects. So the more women see themselves in the women that are running, the more diversity of thought, diversity of background, and lived experiences will be the next bench of women running next year and beyond.
Lynn, who are some of the candidates that are exciting you?
I mean, Glynda, you hit all of the most exciting women that I've been watching too, especially Candace here in Texas. But I think what was so interesting to me is that I think a number of these districts that were never deemed flippable or could possibly be like a Democratic leaning district is now in that case, is now like within the margin of victory. And I truly believe it is because of the women that have stepped up and chosen to run, right? And like women of color, like the lived experiences that they bring. And I think what was so brilliant, and like Candace did this really well in a primary, like the runoff election became such a nationalized runoff election here in Texas. But I think it's the storytelling, their presence, what they chose to present themselves to voters, like that is so uniquely for Black and brown women. Like that's so uniquely theirs, right? And I think that's like why it's sparking such a unique interest from voters watching what's happening, whether they're running for Congress, running for the local city council, running for judge. It's that element I feel like is so much more palpable this year than in any previous years. Right? Like it's wild, like living in Texas, it's wild to think how many of these congressional seats, Asian American women are running or Black Latinas are running in, and they're now considered flippable, right? Everyone is watching and pouring money into these races. And I want to attribute women to that.
These are great candidates that people are excited to vote for. And we know the presidency is on the top of the ballot, but I tell everyone it's these down ballot races that are also really going to turn people out, because they want to make sure that they get in these candidates as well. We're in the final days of the election. Let's close out. Each of you tell our listeners how they can support your work and get engaged in the final days of this election, but beyond, because we know we got to keep this going, particularly as we continue to build up the political power of brown girls.
Democracy doesn't begin and end on election day. In fact, it begins. And so although we are concerned about when the elections will be called from the presidential to local elections, know that the work continues to be an active member of this democracy. And so, if you are looking to be part of a political home centering Black women, and just like my grandmother, Kimberly and I made a house and a table big enough for everyone. And so although we center Black women and our issues and our leadership, it takes everyone. And so, we welcome you to be part of the political home and help us to expand Black women's political voices. And we've got just a little over a week to help Black women lead at the polls and at the ballot. And so you can phone bank with us, you can text, you can, A'shanti rocks all of our live streams. So if you want to just hear from Black women's thought leadership, join, we're a membership-based organization. All it takes is a click. So go to higherheightsforamerica.org and learn more about the work we're doing. And at the end of the day, we need to invest in Black women. And so we need to open up our pocketbooks and our wallets. And so to not only support organizations, but also to support candidates. And so I would challenge everyone that's listening or watching to, make one more contribution to a candidate that inspires you, at least one. And if you've not ever written a political check or you haven't written a political, this is where I'm auntie check. If you've clicked through and made a contribution, consider making a political budget for the next week and a half. And so it is also just, making a commitment that I'm going to do an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours and volunteer with an organization or a candidate that inspires you and make phone calls and text and to uplift them on social media so that your network will know who these amazing women are.
And close us out.
After that pitch,
I have a line item that says political donations. So every month, I know I have this much money that I'm giving out to people. You got to make it a part of just everyday habits.
Okay, so with RUN AAPI, it's we're in such a unique place with us doing the storytelling that no other group is doing for young Asian American people. And that's like our bottom line, is that a lot of us have been waiting for some kind of cultural shift, right, for Asians, and whether that's in the political space, in the entertainment space, but that is where RUN AAPI exists. So what I would love for our listeners, if y'all could follow us on Instagram, on Twitter at RUN AAPI, that is where you're going to find a lot of whether it's content, whether it's showcasing a lot of the Asian American talent coming from the creative industry, and being able to really amplify a lot of what's happening on the ground. So we are double downing in Georgia and in Texas for the rest of the cycle. We were contacting voters last night, where our co-founders of RUN AAPI, we taught them how to text bank for the first time. But that's where a lot of people are at this year. A lot of people are just starting to jump in, and that's totally okay. And so we'll be having a couple more event activations, specifically for people who have never been political, period. So I would love for everyone to follow us on our social media accounts.
And we will have the information for RUN AAPI and Higher Heights in the show notes, so y'all can go and get involved. Glynda, Lynn, thank you both for joining us today, sharing your knowledge. I appreciate you giving us your time during this busy season. And I'm just so thankful that I get to do this work with both of you. Really appreciate you both.
Thank you so much to all of our listeners. Please take the time to rate and review wherever you listen to your podcast. For more information on the Brown Girls Guide to Politics, check us out at www.thebgguide.com and on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The BG Guide. The Brown Girls Guide to Politics podcast is produced by Wonder Media Network. You can find them at wondermedianetwork.com. Thank you so much to all of our listeners. Until next time, Brown Girls.